The end of the Clone Wars saw the end of both the Galactic Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems, as the Empire became the dominant force in the galaxy. But the end of the Confederacy wasn't the end of the Separatist movement, or the end of the Empire's other enemies. For the years after the end of the Clone Wars, the Empire waged a war on their enemies in a campaign called the Reconquest of the Rim. Though on paper, the sides of the Reconquest of the Rim were the same as those of the Clone Wars, the Reconquest was a much more brutal conflict. Jedi leadership had always tempered the harshness of the Republic military during the Clone Wars, but with the Jedi gone, the clone stormtroopers and their commanding officers became outright vicious. The Separatist holdouts and the outlaws they allied with were shown no mercy, and there was no one left in the galaxy that would hear their cries for help.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Following the declaration of a new order, Emperor Palpatine finally had the power base he had been working toward for decades. He had dictatorial command of a massive civilization, a powerful police state to keep it in check, and a massive military-industrial complex to bring bear against all who opposed him in force. With the Jedi gone, he had a number of highly skilled officers and millions of devoted clone stormtroopers at his command, but by the nature of such a state, the Empire needed enemies to justify its existence. The military needed a war to prove that it was necessary, and the police state needed hidden traitors to root out to silence dissent. In two simultaneous campaigns, the Empire justified both of them. The more publicized of these campaigns was the Reconquest of the Rim, a war against the Separatist holdouts and the pirate bands that they allied with. Following the mission to Mustafar and the slaughter of the Separatist Council, the Confederacy of Independent Systems dissolved and its armies were shut down. But Separatists that supported the Confederacy were determined to not go quietly into the night, and across the Outer Rim, they made trouble for the fledgling Empire, sparking what amounted to a second round of the Clone Wars. The Imperial military gleefully went after the Separatist holdouts in a series of 6 campaigns between 19 and 17 BBY. The Seotric Offensive, Cymerthian Insurrection, Five Vales Campaign, Listerhole Campaign, Norlian Crisis, and Western Reaches Operation were all wildly effective and greatly expanded the borders of the new Empire. They also solidified support for the Empire, Palpatine, and the Stormtrooper Corps, as well as newly minted war heroes like Grand Moff Tarkin, Admiral Yularen, General Ramodi, General Dodonna, and Admiral Screed. But despite all the propagandizing Imperial media did for the war, the Reconquest of the Rim was a very dark and bloody conflict, more so than the Clone Wars itself had been. With the Jedi gone, the Imperial military became outright merciless. Clone stormtroopers had always hated their Separatist enemies, and when the officers that commanded them started to encourage them to turn their hatred into bloodthirst, they were all too willing to comply. The clones had never really cared about the civilians of the galaxy. They weren't trained to, after all. As a result, they showed no mercy to civilian populations, especially those that had once been separatist. This behavior was encouraged by many of their officers and by Darth Vader, who intermittently worked with frontline units during the Reconquest. Take the Battle of Ostor, for example. In that battle, a part of the Western Reaches operation, a force of Clone Wars veterans under General Rom attempted to wipe out a separatist holdout that had taken root on the planet, fleeing Imperial justice. The separatists retreated between Rom and his clones, and he ordered them to pursue and execute any survivors, ordering CT-5539 to shoot anyone that turned back. In doing so, he led his men right into a separatist trap. Nearly every clone in the unit was killed, and when General Rom attempted to flee, CT-5539 shot him per orders and reported back to Darth Vader himself. Vader personally oversaw the counterattack, this time opting to attack the separatists from above. CT-5539 flew alongside him, but he was shot down by one of the separatists' leaders, a clone deserter. CT-5539 survived and was captured by the separatists, who held him prisoner in a hospital and tried to win him over to their cause. Instead, CT-5539 killed the clone deserter and sabotaged the city's defenses, allowing Vader and his wingmen to swoop in and erase the whole place, killing separatists and their civilians alike, including all of the wounded in hospital. This was pretty common fare for civilians on the wrong end of the reconquest of the Rim. As far as the Empire was concerned, if there were separatists on a planet, the whole planet was separatist and thus they deserved to die. Even more disturbingly, Imperial citizens actually cheered on these war crimes much of the time. The reconquest of the Rim was happening exclusively on the fringe of the Empire, far from where most of its civilian populace lived. They didn't care about the lives of people out on the Rim, even innocents, and they bought into the mentality of separatist cells making whole populations separatists, just as much as the clones did. Now, that's not to say that the clones became monsters without the influence of the Jedi. For his part, CT-5539 was horrified by what he saw in Ostor, and after the battle, he chose to retire and become a farmer. But the Kaminoans did engineer the clones to be naturally aggressive, for obvious reasons, and by large, they also had more than their fair share of pent-up anger from being treated like droids all their lives. As a result, it was easy for them to snap when there weren't people actively working to keep them centered and calm, which Imperial officers generally didn't even know how to do. Clones that were sent to hunt down rogue Jedi were particularly liable to snap. Simultaneously with the reconquest of the Rim, the most skilled units of clone stormtroopers were sent out under Darth Vader to continue the Great Purge. A little over 100 Jedi survived the execution of Order 66, and those clone units that had proven themselves capable of killing Jedi were sent to finish the job. Oftentimes, Vader chose the original units of particular Jedi fugitives to hunt their old generals down, turning their shame over failing their mission the first time into a bloodthirsty drive to make up for it. When such units weren't available, he typically sent the 501st Legion instead. An example of one such battle was that of the subjugation of New Plimto. Though New Plimto was a core world, it had seceded during the Clone Wars, and after the rise of the Empire, its separatist natives had rallied around a Jedi, Das Janir, who led them in resistance against the Stormtrooper Corps. A detachment of the 501st Legion under Commander Vil was sent to suppress them, and Darth Vader personally oversaw the mission, as Janir's presence among the rebel ranks was well known. Vil and his men ultimately pushed the Nosaurian rebels back to Hearth Axe Pass, where Janir and his men rallied for a last stand. While the families of the rebels evacuated on the other side of the pass, the Nosaurians fought until they were completely overwhelmed by the 501st. When the battle was clearly lost, many of the remaining Nosaurians surrendered, only for Commander Vil to order them all shot. Every last fighter, except ironically for Das Janir and one other, was murdered, and their families were shipped off to slave colonies. To top it all off, Darth Vader had more misgivings about any of those things than any of the clones did. This wasn't a one-off thing either. On Tula, Commander Keller used similar methods to, unsuccessfully, track down a pair of Jedi survivors, even going so far as to impose martial law on a whole city over the Jedi. On Kashyyyk, Commander Fey attempted to cover bomb a whole Wookiee village and a large swath of the surrounding forest to kill Quinlan Vos. A month later, clone stormtroopers did similarly horrible things all over Kashyyyk, rounding up much of the population to be used as slave labor and burning entire cities solely because some Jedi fugitives happened to be passing through at one point. For enemies of the Empire living through this period, it was nothing short of terrifying. They didn't know that a rebellion would be able to bring the Empire down in just a few decades. All they saw was the ruthless annihilation of anyone that was the slightest bit associated with enemies of the state, and most of the galaxy cheering it on. It was only a few years into what Palpatine had said would be 10,000 years of Imperial rule, and anyone that didn't wholeheartedly support the new regime had to wonder how many of those years they'd be able to live for. It also made the galaxy forever fear the face of Jango Fett. The Great Jedi Purge and the reconquest of the Rim showed the galaxy how far the Empire's clone stormtroopers were willing to go in following their orders, and it made the galaxy fear clones all the more for it. During the Clone Wars, separatist propagandists had depicted the clones as unhinged, bloodthirsty abominations, and many an Imperial citizen that caught wind of what the stormtroopers had done quietly thought that they might have been onto something. So that's the story of the Second Clone Wars, the reconquest of the Rim, and the Great Jedi Purge. But what do you think? Would you like to hear more in depth about the reconquest of the Rim? Let us know in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, make sure you check out all those links in the description below, including our Discord, where you can talk to myself and other Star Wars fans, our Geetsly's Gaming Network, where you can play games with other Star Wars fans, and our music channel, where you can check out all the music we play in the background of the videos on this channel. So all those links are in the description below. Just click that little show more button. Anyways, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.